Good afternoon, good morning, good evening for some of you. Welcome to this seminar on the EU State and Resilience Building Contract, taking stock to look forward. My name is Estelle Balian. I have the pleasure to be the moderator for this event today. And before we go into some opening remarks with Mr. Félix Fernandez-Shaw, I wanted to give some housekeeping and to introduce the tools that we will use during this event. As you can see, you are on a web stream, which means that you don't have the usual function of the chat to interact with us, but we have a different interface that we will use. It's called Slido. And if you are on the web stream, you will see next to this window the Slido interface, where you can have some questions that we will ask you, some polls, but also you will be able to ask questions during the different Q&As and during the panel. So I suggest that we try it together. And first of all, you can enter your name if you have not done so to go into the Slido interface. And if you prefer to have it on a separate equipment like your iPhone or your cell phone or your iPad or some other tablet, you can use the app Slido, and you can use the code SRBC to enter into our meeting. Okay, for the first question, it's already up and running. We can we would like to ask you where you are joining from. You can answer with the country, the city, even if you want. I have a look. So I see quite a lot of people from Brussels. And let me see. Montalcino, Geneva, Bridgetown, Madrid, Montreal, Stockholm, Turin. Quite a very nice range of locations. You can keep answering as you come into this web stream. Next to the web stream, you have the Slido interface where you can enter for answering this first question. Okay. Then we will have also some polls. And I would like to introduce the first poll before we go into the contents. The first poll is also a way for us to get to know you a little bit. So the first poll will ask you which institutions you are affiliated with, and we have some choices. As you are answering, I wanted to give you a quick recap of the agenda for this event. So we are starting with the opening remarks, and then we will have a first part of the event where you have the presentation of the independent evaluation of the European State Building Contract instrument. And then we will go into a first panel of discussion of the learnings to better support economic resilience, taking stock of the evaluation results, but also looking forward with the panelists. And then we'll have a second panel where we will look into the learnings for the Nexus Peace, Security and Development. And you will have the opportunity through Slido to ask questions to the panelists in both panels. Okay, as we are going for the poll, I see that we have quite a lot of people from civil society, and also from other international institutions and from the EU institutions. Okay, I think you can see the results now on the Slido interface. Okay, and before we go with Mr. Fernandez-Shaw, I will ask a last poll question, but I will give you the results after the opening remarks. And this last poll is about your expectations in this event, for this event. So may I ask Erwin from our technical team to go into the next poll? Perfect. Okay. And you can see on Slido, you will see the results as we go with one to the other questions. Okay, so for the opening remarks, I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Felix Fernandez Shaw, who is the director of the Directorate D in DG INTPA, the Sustainable Development Policy and Coordination. He is also looking after the programming of the EU external assistance for the next 7 years. So we're looking forward to your opening remarks, Mr. Fernandez Shaw.
Thank you very much, Stell. You know, normally people like me say it's a great honor to open the seminar and welcome you here. It's not only so because I am the director in INPA in charge of evaluation, and that's the coordinating unit for evaluating all external DGs in the Commission. But it's also because I've been working on programming and external action of the Union for the past 10 years. In fact, when we started the state and resilience building contracts, I was in the EAS, and I remember working on budget support, working on the configuration of state resilience building contracts. So it is, I think I'm very happy to have the opportunity to look at it now from the end and see what have we learned. As you said, Stell, that one of the big, I think, positive things about all of us teleworking is that we can be many of us here today. From, you just said, Stell, yourself, many different countries and organizations are participating. And I think it's exactly the kind of seminar and feedback that we want to have in a meeting like today, to be able to understand and share what we have learned and what we have done right and wrong in the EU state and resilience building contracts, and share your opinions about what do you think we should be doing next. Particularly timely, of course, because first of all, the EU state building contracts, we've been with them since 2012. And I think this is the first and the largest thematic evaluation carried out ever on EU budget support. Very timely, because not only it looks at our experience in fragile situations and post-crisis disaster context, you see also because we have the nexus, you see it also because we're starting the programming, so maybe it's the right moment. You say that I'm coordinating the programming. Well, this is the moment to take a look at this and take a closer look. But also because our commissioner, Jutta Urpilainen, and also the HRVP Borrell and Commissioner Varelli are paying close attention to what do we do with and through budget support, what is its impact, and what do we get from it, what do countries get from it. And this is now also not only in view of our next 7 years, it's also, I think that situation today is quite different from the one in 2012, from all points of view. And not only COVID, but COVID is of course a major factor. So we have also been using budget support quite strongly to tackle the consequences of COVID, contributing to recovery and resilience. And the state and resilience building contract has been very instrumental in 2020 in helping 95 countries and overseas countries and territories in their response to the pandemic and the global slowdown. Budget support, and I'm also one of the things that probably you didn't say, well, you didn't say it for sure, but you probably didn't know, is that I was in charge of budget support until January with the reorganization of INPA. So many of the colleagues that are on the call today are good colleagues and friends, and we have together, they have together, I must pay tribute to their work in disbursing 3 billion euros of budget support grants in 2020, particularly with payments from 1.6 to 1.8 annually between 2014 and 2019. And I think this is also a tribute to the flexibility of the instrument to their own rapid reaction capacity of the colleagues in a times when we all understood that reacting quickly and financially to COVID was probably the thing to do, and we did it with the instrument we had. Therefore, redesigning, topping up, front-loading, new operations, and particularly, notably, resilience contracts in the Western Balkans have been very, also, and in the neighborhood, have been very instrumental in this regard, because they have provided partner countries with additional fiscal space to cope with shortfalls, with the additional costs for health systems, to finance efforts in households and local businesses indeed. Well, you know, if you just listen to what I've just said, this is also what we did in Europe. But we had a much better fiscal position to do it. And I think our support has been timely. It has also been done together with the member states. Team Europe lifted off last year when we started looking at ourselves, notably our budget support unit, but also our joint programming unit. And we started realizing that all the member states and the IMF and other international institutions were going to do something with the COVID response. And we managed to get the member states to conform Team Europe, to get around a concept of Team Europe supports partner countries in their response to COVID. And I think this has been also a major result of what we did last year. Now on to, I think, looking a bit forward. We all know that one of the main perspectives is not only trying to put an end to the health situation of the pandemic, but also pushing forward the Global Recovery Initiative. What we've done with the IMF by contributing to the IMF CCRT has allowed for the IMF CCRT's third phase installment to free up money for COVID response in partner countries. And also what we've done in the G20 with the Common Framework on Debt Treatment and the DSSI, the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, where we have really managed to open a new, I would say, process in global economic governance. Well, you may want to also think, and what does this have to do with anything? Well, you know, budget support has been and continues to be at the center of what we do. And this is why it's important that our work on budget support and its integrated elements on DRM, but also on state building, I think are important, particularly as the contribution to debt relief has also provided additional budgetary resources to partner countries in 2020. No wonder President von der Leyen announced a global recovery initiative in May 2020, the need to have one, to bring together budget support, sustainable investment and debt relief around ambitious policy agendas for promoting SDGs. We now have the MFF, the Global Europe NDICI instrument. Please call it Global Europe, don't call it NDICI, because nobody knows what NDICI is. Well, maybe you may ask also what is Global Europe, but I think you may have a fair answer to that one. What we want to do is learn from all this, and in the next 7 years, try to build forward. Now, of course, the evaluation has come, as I said, a very critical moment. We have built extensive experience in the European Union on budget support in fragile situations and post-crisis disaster context. The insights that we have today, and you will be discussing, are, I would say, continuously helping us in the formulation of budget support programs, the ones I mentioned from last year, and the ones that we're going to open up in the incoming budget cycle. State resilience building contracts have contributed to strengthen health systems, but also administrative capacities. They have also been key in gaining access to social services, notably for girls and women. However, the evaluation recommends to pay more attention to equitable access to those services and to their quality. And I think this is something that we always need to take into account. The quality is important. And then I think it's also important to understand what improvement we can make on economic resilience. I think the evaluation shows that we need to insist on that one. In the seminar, Estelle just mentioned we have two panels, representatives from partner countries, member states, civil society, IMF, World Bank, EU. Not sure it gets any better than that. But we really want you to give us ideas. We not only want to tell you what we have resolved out of the evaluation, we want to give ideas on how to learn from them. But of course, these ideas are not only valid for the budget support instrument and for the evaluation. You know, the budget support instrument is a nice instrument, but like we normally say in the OECD DAC, and the commissioner and the DG always say, ODA is not the solution. It's not a solution on its own. It's a tool we have to support partner countries in their way to sustainable development, but we need to consider it jointly with other efforts from the European Union, from member states, from the World Bank, the UN, the civil society. And this is where I think one of the questions we need to ask you more thoroughly is how to reach an appropriate mix of different instruments that we can juggle with. Particularly, Global Europe allows us to do that for the first time, including guarantees for sovereign lending and for private sector investment. So how can we best combine all these? As usual, I want to thank a lot of people, so that should take me like 2 or 3 hours to thank everybody that has participated in this evaluation. But I think that I will not be unfair if I start by units D4 and E1. Particularly, I mean, a lot of people in that unit in those units who are today on the line are not only my former colleagues, but they are good friends, excellent people, and they've made possible this evaluation. But of course, when you work in 23 countries, you have to talk about delegations. They are out there, they are budget support. They are the ones doing the politics. We can do the planning, we can do the counseling, we can do the accompanying, but it's the delegations doing the groundwork and the footwork and making sure that it works. So they've largely contributed to the reference group, together with colleagues in INPA, engineer, in General Secretariat in the EAS. And I think, you know, they've come together very well. So thanking all of them, I think you're probably now fed up with listening to me, and you really want to get on with Virginie and Mary, who are going to tell you what is it they found. They are the team leaders of the evaluation. They will guide us through the main results of the evaluation, and I really want to thank them for working with us. And I think that's over to you. I hope we have an excellent day of lessons learned, something that, by the way, we tend not to do too much these days. And I would really think that we could learn a couple of lessons and then humbly try to bring them into the next programming. Thanks a lot, Estelle, Virginie and Mary, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Fernandez-Cho. I'm taking the floor again just before passing it to Virginie and Marie. Maybe for those who just joined us, a quick recap that we have the Slido interface where we interact with you. And you can see, for example, the results of the poll on your expectations that can be displayed there. So you have mainly people are expecting to get to know more about the EU State and Resilience Building Contract instrument, and also getting a chance to ask some questions. Before we go into the evaluation, I just would like to launch a poll that you can answer during the presentation, mainly to know how familiar you are with the EU State and Resilience Building Contracts. And we will answer this poll. We will see the results after the presentation. Also, during the presentation, if you have questions that are triggered by the presentation, please don't hesitate to use in Slido the Q&A section, where you can ask already some questions. We will use them at the end of the evaluation presentation to trigger some discussion with the evaluation team. So now I'm very pleased to introduce our evaluation team from the company ADE, Aide à la Décision Économique, ADE. So the evaluation team leader, Mrs. Marie van Overbeke, has been working for more than 20 years in the field of economic policies and structural reforms in developing countries and in Europe. She has closely followed the evolution of budget support as an aid modality and has carried out numerous evaluations of budget support programs for the EU, but also for other donors, such as France, Belgium, or the African Development Bank. And Virginie Morillon, the evaluation deputy team leader, is a macroeconomist within ADE. She has been working for more than 15 years in developing and emerging countries. She specializes on macroeconomic reforms as well as on conflict resolution, security, and fragility issues. She participated to a wide range of policy evaluations for various donors and institutions, most often covering budget support operations. I think I leave you in very, very good hands here for the introduction presentation to the independent evaluation on the SBC instrument. Marie, over to you.
Thank you, Estelle. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to present the results of the evaluation of EU State Building Contract, SBC, over the period 2012-2018. So the presentation will try to summarize in 20 minutes, more than a year of work. So it's a challenge. We will first quickly recall the specificities of the State Building Contract instrument and the objective pursuit. Then we will spend some time to discuss the contribution of SBC to state consolidation, what has been achieved, what was not achieved in the main areas targeted. Finally, we will share with you the main conclusions and recommendations to improve the effectiveness of SBCs. And we will also provide some insights on how the instrument has been used to respond to the COVID crisis. So the State Building Contract has been introduced by the European Commission in 2012 to intervene with budget support in situation of fragility or transition. The main objective of the SBC is to strengthen the capacity of government partners to fulfill their core functions and to ensure the delivery of basic services to the population. More specifically, the SBC aims first to improve the financial capability of the government, notably to re-establish macro stability. Secondly, to support the efforts of the government to guarantee vital state functions, including provision of peace and security, as well as basic social services. Third, to foster a process of transition towards development and democratic governance. And the fourth objective was added in 2017. It is to consolidate the resilience of the state and society which led to then being called the State and Resilience Building Contract, SRBC, but we'll continue to use SBC during this presentation. So SBCs were deployed in high-risk context, and their design and implementation were adapted to monitor and face the main risk. As you may know, the SBC has the same modus operandi as all other EU budget support. It is a package based on three main pillars. First, the financial flows to the budget, whose disbursements depend on general and specific conditions. Second, policy dialogue, which is a key component of all budget support, but even more in fragile situations. And finally, capacity building through complementary measures, which might provide technical assistance to reinforce the weakest part of national systems. As you can see on this map, the SBC was very rapidly mobilized on a large scale. 23 countries have benefited of 42 programs during the period under review, for a total of about 3.9 billion euro. And more than half of the programs were implemented in West and Central Africa. Remember that those figures relate to the situation before the COVID crisis. For your information, the main beneficiaries were, by decreasing order, Mali, then Afghanistan, Tunisia, Ukraine, and Haiti. So 5 countries in different continents with very different contexts. Overall, SBCs have been used in diverse fragile environments marked by economic shocks, political transition, and natural disasters. Of course, the EU was not intervening alone in those countries. The IMF, the World Bank, the regional development banks, also some member states were present to support those countries with budgetary support. This chart shows the main sectors that were targeted, supported to the specific conditions attached to the variable tranches of the programs. The focus on the variable tranche used really reflects the specificities of the SBC and of the EU approach. As you can see, the bulk targeted better macroeconomic and financial governance, including public finance management and domestic revenue mobilization. The program also targeted democracy and the rule of law, including the area of security, justice, and the fight against corruption. And last but not least, around 20% of the variable tranche indicators were focused on basic social services, education, and health mainly. So this nice graph summarizes the main progress to which SBC contributed to in the main areas targeted. So first, looking at macroeconomic stabilization and resilience and public finance management, we can see that SBCs first and foremost contributed to restore macroeconomic stability. SBCs were quickly deployed and contributed to increase fiscal space. They represented over 5% of public revenue in half of the countries reviewed, with a massive intervention in the first years following the crisis. So through the financial flows, SBCs contributed to limit the shocks on government spending and to preserve current expenditures. But SBCs were not able to avoid adjustments on capital expenditures and on a decrease of public investment. So in parallel, in view of consolidating the longer-term fiscal base, a growing emphasis was put on reform to increase domestic revenue mobilization. SBC contributed to progress achieved in this area, and especially in improving the collection of what is owed. Then PFM system strengthening was also a major objective of SBCs, but results were somewhat disappointing. There was some progress, especially on cash management and budget programming process, but overall progress was often complicated by the political and institutional weaknesses of these countries. Budget transparency was another point of attention in the field of public finance. It has improved in many beneficiary countries, particularly the availability of budgetary documents and the role of Parliament and civil society in the budget programming process. Overall, it was difficult to address structural policies to strengthen the economy, and the economic resilience of beneficiary countries has not been really reinforced up to now. Then if we look to basic social services, the most striking effect of SBCs lies in their contribution to maintain public spending, mainly current spending, on education, and even increasing budget for health. So SBC contributed to ensure the continuation of the provision of basic services by the state, and even to enlarge access to primary education and to health service for women and children. And it's mainly due to the combination of financing together with conditions and technical dialogue. Nevertheless, in this area, SBCs were not really able to bring about longer-term reforms, which might contribute to improve sectoral policies, the steering of the sectors, and in fine, the quality of social services in the longer term. So now I give the floor to Virginie on peace and democratic governance.
Thank you so much, Mary. So in the area of democratic governance, over the last 10 years, we observe little progress overall in the beneficiary countries, be it in terms of state legitimacy, social cohesion, or political fragility. Within this context, SBCs contributed to setting up the conditions going with transition towards democratic governance. This covered institutional development and the initiation of sensitive reform processes in the areas of justice, transitional justice, fight against corruption, security, elections, etc. What is clear from the evaluation is that SBCs had the most positive effects during the stabilization phase. They could support political transition when political will to implement reforms was there. In terms of peace building and rebuilding of the social contract, the effects reached were highly dependent from the strength of peace processes and the quality of public governance, with positive effects in a context of new political leadership or democratic changeover, and rather negative effects when electoral processes were unstable or where peace processes were fragile. Over to you, Mary, for the last part of the graph.
Yes, in addition, transversally, as you can see at the bottom of the graph, SBC enabled a complete alignment on national policies and national systems. There are other effects worth to be mentioned, notably good predictability, as well as better coordination between budget support donors. One downside is the limited appropriation of the programs by national stakeholders. So now we can jump to the conclusions already. So first of all, it must be recognized that the SBC has been a unique and necessary instrument to address the specific urgent needs of situation of fragility, transition, and to avoid processes of state collapse. The response was rapid and flexible and able to cover urgent financing needs of the government. And the SBC is really the only instrument that enables the EU to finance government current expenditures with a grant in a short period of time and to ensure the survival of the state in extreme cases. So overall, the response was appropriate to the context and it relied on a proper fragility assessment. So the main types of added value of SBCs were to allow large-scale interventions through grants and to place the government at the heart of the response to fragility, transition, or reconstruction. Secondly, SBC proved to be most effective in stabilization. So SBCs provide a response to stabilization needs by mainly enlarging the fiscal space and protecting education and health current spending essentially, and by setting the conditions for political transition. But their contribution to state building and longer term resilience has been more mixed. The focus put on PFM as well as on domestic revenue mobilization contribute to strengthen partly the core system of the state. And this is important to lay down the foundations enabling partner countries to implement structural reforms, but progress were really limited and below expectations in terms of structural reforms. And there are different explanations. First, of course, the transition towards consolidation is much more complex in environments where it is difficult to introduce a long-term vision and especially where stabilization is at stake. But we also could observe that the policy leverage of general conditions did not materialize as expected. And we noticed that as a general purpose instrument, it was difficult for a state building contract to address complex sectoral issues. In terms of results observed, the SBC alone could not trigger an exit to fragility. All beneficiary countries have remained in fragile economic situations, and until recently, limited attention has been given to growth factors, while in the meantime, it remains difficult to tackle root causes of fragility. Conversely, regarding social vulnerability, SBC has made a useful contribution to primary education and to children and women health, but less so in terms of food security and safety nets. As far as critical success factors are concerned, the picture is a bit mixed. The evaluation shows that the main strengths of SBC were a good understanding of the fragility situation and the risk, rapidity and predictability, and also close technical dialogue. But several weaknesses were also highlighted. Difficulties to revise strategies in changing environments, a lack of continuity in the reforms supported, very limited complementarity with capacity building, And finally, the fact that the SBC alone could not bring enough political leverage. So finally, the instrument is not yet sufficiently well understood or known by most of the stakeholders involved. The efforts made so far to allow for wider ownership of national authorities and of civil society have been insufficient. The evaluation also shows a lack of comprehensive vision within the EU to respond to the situation of fragility, and leading to poor complementarity between EU instruments, and especially between SBC and other EU intervention deployed in fragile contexts, such as by ECHO. So those are the main lessons or conclusions of the evaluation. And on this basis, we would like to highlight 5 recommendations in particular. First, we recommend to position the state building contract as a stabilizing instrument while giving a clear focus on the needs for social cohesion and democratic governance, and in the meantime, by continuing to strengthen the core of the government system, which mainly means public finance management and domestic resource mobilization, which are quite necessary for supporting consolidation policies. We also recommend to improve the design of SBCs in different ways, notably by better addressing the changing context and the evolution of needs, and by ensuring that programs fully integrate key issues such as territorial and environmental questions, the management of public expenditures in priority sectors, and the situation of the most vulnerable populations. Another recommendation is that the EU raises its political profile in dialogue, including through the use of general conditions. And this can only be possible if human resources are strengthened within EU delegation. Our 4th recommendation concerns the development of a long-term holistic approach for responding to situation of fragility, which integrates SBC within a multi-instrument response. And finally, we recommend to strengthen national ownership and accountability, as well as to systematically involve civil society. So now I will leave Virginie comment the last slide.
Thank you, Mary. The scope of this evaluation ended in 2018. In view of the current pandemic, we also wanted to feed into ongoing discussions to respond to this crisis. AD is also currently leading the fast-track assessment of the EU's response to COVID-19, including through budget support. We hence share here some of the very early preliminary findings of this study. As mentioned during the opening remarks by Mr. Fernandez-Shaw, budget support, including through the SRBC, has been widely used by the Commission in 2020 across the globe to respond to the crisis. Nearly 3 billion euros were disbursed in 2020 in the countries covered by DG International Partnerships and DG NEAR. This is almost a doubling of the amounts disbursed in 2019, 1.6 billion euros. The EU response to the COVID crisis was mobilized quickly through budget support, including through the SRBC. The bulk of it took different forms: front-loading payments foreseen for 2020 and foreseen for subsequent years, transforming viable tranches into fixed tranches with disbursements made in 2020, designing also new programs specifically focusing on the COVID-19 crisis. What we see so far is that the EU response focused on supporting the fiscal stimulus and relief package that has been implemented in most partner countries. It also focused on the continued strengthening of public finance management systems of beneficiary countries. In some of the countries we have reviewed so far, budget support clearly contributed to absorb the economic shock. In increasing the fiscal space, this really contributed to maintain macroeconomic stability. We could also observe in some of the countries significant budgetary reallocations in 2020 to the ministries the most involved in the response, for instance, Ministry of Health, including for capital expenditure, which is quite interesting. This is where our presentation ends. We remain available for the QA session, and I will leave the floor to Estelle. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mary and Virginie, for this very comprehensive presentation of 1 year work in 20 minutes. It's a challenge, and I really appreciate your effort to stay with time. We have now the Q&A session, and I would like to ask our audience to use the Slido interface in the Q&A part to submit some questions for Mary and for Virginie. I will pass to you the questions, and then you can choose who wants to answer. So I will. One thing that's interesting in Slido is that if you see someone else has asked a question you're interested in as well, you can thumb up, and this question will go up in the selection, so I see it quickly. So we had a question again. I think you had a slide about that, but maybe to recall a little bit the basics about the instrument. In which country has been implemented the biggest contract for state building contracts, and in the total amount of these contracts? So to have some idea, I guess, of the scale of the contracts and in which countries they were mainly spent. So Mary or Virginie, you can unmute for the Q&A. Mary, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry, it's okay. So yeah, just I go back to the map. Well, okay, it doesn't work. So the main, so the total of programs allocated during the period is about 3.9 billion euro. And if we look at the 5 main beneficiaries, as I mentioned, the first one is Mali with a total of 615 million euro through 3 different programs. Then we have Afghanistan with 15 million euro with 2 different SBCs. The third one is Tunisia with 440 million euro through 5 different programs. And then we have Ukraine with only 1 program, but of 355 million euro. And the 5th one is Haiti with 2 state building contracts for an amount of 236 million. So you see that, yeah, there are large amounts of funds which are transferred to the budget of the state.
On the main contracts. I have another question, actually, a question related to some of the points raised by Mr. Fernandez-Shaw. How would you assess the coordination of the SRBC program with other funding programs implemented by the IMF, by the World Bank, and by other regional banks? I think it's a key question with this aspect. Virginie, Marie, who wants to take
but maybe I can start, and if Virginie wants to intervene. So the coordination, as you, if you see the chart here, you see that the assessment of the evaluation is positive, and what we have seen is that between donors allocating budget support, the coordination was rather good, especially during the formulation of programs. The design was really done in close interaction with the other donors, and there was an in-depth dialogue. The coordination was particularly strong on macro financial stabilization and PFM issues, because they are, of course, the IMF also as a leader, and there are already some, platforms for dialogue existing. What must be said that the coordination was especially strong during crisis, a bit less when we are in situation, where persistent fragility and structural vulnerabilities.
Okay,
maybe just one point. Yeah, maybe just one point to complement. This is actually also a finding we see in the way partners have responded to the COVID crisis, with a very strong connection when the crisis hits, and less so during the implementation of the response through the year, including in 2021.
Okay, a complementary question actually. How would you see the advantages, the distinctive advantages of this SBC, of the SBC contract compared to the other programs?
To be sure I understand the question, compared to other budget support programs?
Well, I would say for both other budget support programs, and maybe also other programs from other donors.
Okay, so I think what we mentioned is that if we look, what are the main added value of SRBC in this type of situation, is the possibility to intervene with very large amounts of funds, with grants, and to support the government action, and to place the government at the center of the solution. So I think this is, I would say one of the main added value is really to be able to support the core function of the state rapidly. I would maybe also add that it's interesting to mention that the EU SBC has also some specificities when you compare to other donor budget support. And I think that the specificities of the EU are maybe not enough recognized, especially the emphasis on social sector and the emphasis on peace and democratic governance is really a specificity of the EU when intervening with budget support.
Thank you. Virginie, you wanted to add something? We should move, I think, Erwin from the technical team, can you move the PowerPoint to the slide?
No, I think it's fine. Yeah, it's just okay. That our first conclusion was actually responding to the comments. So this is
okay. Okay, thanks a lot. So I have a question related to the fact that you would have do you have a way, a counterfactual analysis between the countries that benefited from the SBC instrument and those who didn't, and how does that compare?
So this was a real challenge, and to also evaluate the contribution of SBC to the results, and we will not enter into a technical discussion, but yeah, it was quite challenging. So what we have done is we have used quantitative analysis to try to compare different groups of countries according to different factors and characteristics. And we use actually what we call ANOVA, which is an analysis of variance of different variables for different groups, groups having received SBCs and groups which are not have not received SBCs. And we also cross that with the situation in terms of fragility. So we had 4 different groups crossing fragility and the fact to having received SBCs. And we compared the situation of the 4 groups during 3 different periods. And we analyzed the evolution of the main indicators for each groups. And it was very useful to do that, because this analysis permits us to really see the positive effects of SBC on public expenditures, and especially on social expenditures, mainly the current spending in education and in health. So that's how we have managed to try to have counterfactual. Actually, we looked at, we analyzed 15 countries over the 23. So we had also a large scope, a large base for analysis. And we, among those 15 countries, we had Burundi, where the SBC has been stopped in 2015. So it was also a kind of counterfactual, a country where the program was stopped for different political reasons. And we can use what happened when the program stops and see what were the effects of stopping and stopping the flows to the government.
Okay.
But if you are interested, I think there is an annex in the report which explains exactly, the quantitative, which presents the quantitative analysis that we used.
Yes, thanks a lot, Mary. Actually, we haven't reminded participants that the report is available in English, in French, and you have a brochure as well in English and in French, and you have all the annexes. It's all available through the main webpage of the event. So if people want to go more into details. I have 2 more questions. I'm looking at the same time with Slido, so I apologize if you see me turning the head. So a question regarding the lack of integration between capacity building efforts and SRBC. Both are supposed to work towards reforms. How do you explain this issue of not having enough support to the capacity building, or the consequences is the expectations are not met in terms of capacity building? Marie or Virginie?
Yes, maybe first, I'm not sure it's a specificity of state building contract. I think this problem of articulation between the complementary measures and the rest of the programs may be also observed in other types of budget support. But it's true that here there is a kind of a problem of timing, because the programs and the ideas to intervene very rapidly, and the technical assistance and capacity building usually takes much more time to be implemented, and this may make them, reduce the complementarities and the synergies between the 2 components of the programs, the different components of the program. I think we must also mention that when programs are formulated, especially for SRBC, the demand for technical assistance and for capacity building is not always very clear. And in the programs, the financing agreement, it's there is no clear orientations on how the technical assistance will be implemented. So it's also one of the recommendations that we have made, that trying to be more explicit when formulating the programs on the role of the different components of program, and how the technical assistance will reinforce the capacity of the partners to implement the reforms.
Thanks a lot. Virginie, you wanted to add on the capacity building aspects, no? So let me check again some other questions. So we have a question about concrete examples of the transition between the state building contracts and the SRBC, so the moving towards more medium-term program, like support to sector policies. Do you have examples of how this happened in some countries, moving from this first step of stabilization to more like mid-term programs?
Maybe I think first it's we had not enough time to present all the results, but first of all, I think one of the weaknesses of the program is that there is no exit strategy. Okay, so there is no clear vision of how to which kind of instrument can take can continue and have an accent on consolidations. But there are some countries where sector reform contracts then are implemented to support more structural reforms in certain sectors. It's partly the case, for example, in Mali or in Niger, where they have implemented sector reform contract in education or in food security after having started with a state building contract.
Maybe to add, Tunisia could also be a good example where 5 SBCs have been deployed to respond to the political transition back in 2011. And over the years, progressively, a range of sector reform contracts have been progressively designed and implemented to cover the full spectrum of the public policies in Tunisia.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I will go on with some questions. Just to remind you in the Q&A, if some questions are not yet answered, please, if you can actually thumb up so that they move up in the queue. I have a question about the disbursement conditions to have more info, to develop a bit more your findings regarding the disbursement conditions. Maybe explain a little bit on also the general conditions and for the fixed tranche and then the variable tranche, and how does that work? How are disbursement operate?
Yeah. Okay. So there are 4 general conditions that must be fulfilled during for the approval of the programs and for each disbursement, for fixed tranche and for variable tranches. So the 4 general conditions are macroeconomic policies oriented to macroeconomic stability, and credible and relevant reforms of public finance, strategy of public finance management reforms, relevant and credible public policy at national level, and some conditions relate to the transparency of budget transparency and external scrutiny. So the 4 the general conditions are there to ensure that the conditions are in place to make this instrument effective. And it must be checked and controlled, so as I said, for each disbursement. And then you have the specific conditions that are mainly used for variable tranche, and the specific conditions the conditions are related to indicators that have to be achieved for being for the disbursement of the variable tranches. So the general conditions, as we mentioned here, they are difficult to really, I would say, apply, especially when the situation is tricky in terms of stabilization. So there is, for the SBC, the guidelines mention that the assessment of general condition must be more flexible and adapted to the situation. But overall, one of the I think results of this of the evaluation is that the general conditions do not really play the role we expect to really push PFM reforms and quality of public policy. The specific conditions are much more clear in the sense that if the specific condition is not achieved, the part of the disbursements which is linked to this condition is not done. So we have sorry, I just wanted to go back to the slides with the variable tranche here. Indicators. So this slide shows you the different indicators and specific conditions that have been used for the whole 42 programs on average during the period.
Okay, Virginie, you want to add something about disbursement question? So we have some questions also related to the aspect of mixed results on social outcomes. So can you specify a bit what's meant by these mixed results?
Okay, so the main results is that the basic services such as education and health were maintained, and even for education, service for primary education was a bit enlarged. But the point is that there was no real improvement in terms of quality of sectoral policies, capacity, governance capacities, and structural improvements of the way the social services are provided, and especially in terms of quality of services. So the SBC permitted to maintain the provision of basic services, but not to improve really the quality of the services in the long term.
Okay, so it's more for this long-term development of the services. And
more structural reforms that will permit in the long term to really increase and to address the main needs and challenges in the sectors.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit in relation, do you think that, so it's a question from a participant, do you think that the policy leverage could have been stronger if the EU policy technical dialogue, political dialogue were better coordinated? So between the EU policy and technical aspects and the political dialogue, could that have been better coordinated to increase the leverage?
So the evaluation shows that the technical dialogue was quite okay, and also highly appreciate by the partners country, so that it's an important point to mention. But yes, the political dialogue was maybe less effective and more irregular, we can say. So the problem is that the EU provides large amounts of money to those countries, and the commitment maybe at political level is maybe not so strong that what could be expected with those kind of level of funds and programs. Mm-hmm. So how to raise the political strengths and weight of the EU? I think it's not an easy question, but it's something that should be think about it.
Okay, Virginie.
Maybe just to add, it's clearly a key success factors when you have a very good combination of both a good technical dialogue backed up with a strong political dialogue, and clearly it enables the programs to reach a stronger effectiveness overall.
Okay, thanks a lot. We're reaching the end of the Q&A. I have a last question from a participant. So about the mix of SRBC and other modalities used in fragile contexts. So how do they coordinate right now? Meaning like the other modalities related to humanitarian security, support to investments. What came out of your evaluation on this aspect?
What came out is that, yes, at the moment, it's not very, that the complementarities remain very weak, that the program instrument and the SBC and other programs are implemented in kind of isolation, and it's the synergies between some of them have not really been exploited. But of course, it's a general position. There are of course good experiences. We have actually done a kind of a survey and asked to EU staff to give their own perception of the situation. And in terms of complementarity, I think, the complementarity were good with national indicative program projects. They were less good with sector reform contract, which is a bit striking, and also not so strong with humanitarian aids and with the intervention through the instrument contributing to stability and peace and the common security and defense policy. So there is a room really to improve the coordination at that level.
Okay, thanks. Virginie?
Yeah, just a small point. This lack of synergy we could observe in this evaluation is also quite common, and we find it transversally across the evaluations we generally conduct for the EU. I mean, this is a common finding, and this is not specific to SBCs or budget support.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, we're now reaching the end of this Q&A session. I know some of the questions have not been asked or answered yet. We'll keep them. We will also have some of those questions going through the panels as well, so don't worry. Everything will be archived as well, and maybe the evaluation team can have a chance as well to answer later on by email or through other means some of those questions. So we are closing this first part of the meeting. We will be having a short break of 5 minutes and display a short video on the SRBC instrument and the evaluation. So I will let Erwin from the team launch the video, and then I will ask Virginie and Marie to move on with me to backstage. And I would like first to thank you very much, Virginie and Marie, for this presentation. It was, I think, a very good introduction for the panels. Thank you very much.
Every day, crises hit countries that do not have the means to cope with shocks because they are vulnerable. They harm their efforts towards sustainable growth and poverty reduction. They disrupt the economy, destroy jobs, and prevent families from accessing health facilities or kids from going to school. Populations, and particularly the poorest, are the first victims of this fragility. To help its partners facing such situations, the European Union proposes a direct support to the budget of countries, allowing states to continue performing their core functions and delivering essential services to their citizens. This support aims at avoiding the situation to deteriorate and further destabilize the country. It is the State and Resilience Building Contract. Since 2012, the European Union supported more than 25 countries for more than €4 billion. These grants were mobilised within a short time frame and a great deal of flexibility. The State and Resilience Building Contract has proved a unique instrument to contribute to stabilising the macroeconomic situation, to raising revenues, and to strengthening the management of public resources, to focus them on priorities such as the preservation of economic activities, the deployment of health services, or continued access to education. It has contributed to keeping kids at school or to decreasing child and maternal mortality. It has helped foster health systems and make them more resilient to pandemics. The State and Resilience Building Contract has also been instrumental in supporting political transitions towards democratic systems. Through its focus on social cohesion and governance, it has promoted peace and stability in many countries. The European Union will always be there to support its partners facing crises and to help the most vulnerable countries to exit from fragility and give their people a brighter future.